Do you feel any guilt about your involvement in 9/11?
I had gotten an opportunity to start teaching simulators on the side. To me, it was just a young kid from the Middle East.
What was the name that he went by?
It was Hani Hanjour. I will never forget that name.
And did you talk with the FAA officer?
Yeah, he said in the back of the class. I told him the same things we had said is, it seems a little strange. He doesn't seem to speak English as well as he should to be English proficient. Yeah, and he paid cash. It's really strange. Something felt fishy to us. Supposedly, the FBI knew that there was potential for it. They took some initial questions on the phone, find out what we knew and tell them what we'd already basically told, the FAA at the beginning. We didn't think the guy had belonged there. And we told them that we'd told the FAA, and the FAA come out and said, no worries. So.
And then 6 months to a year go by.
Yeah.
And then September 11, 2001.
When we heard about it and all, and as soon as they said terrorists, we were like, our first thoughts went to, could he have been one of them? Deep in the pit of our gut, we thought, that's probably what it was.
Well, Mac, I'm so grateful that you're here today. Thank you so much for coming into the tent.
Oh, you're welcome.
But just being open and willing to share your story. You have an absolutely fascinating story. And you are, unfortunately, I guess, sort of a part of this very remarkable and kind of tragic piece of American history. Yeah. And I'm just really curious to kind of unpack it. So I'm curious, could you just explain to me a little bit about your professional history, who you are, and how you got involved in this whole situation? Okay. Well,
I was in the Air Force for, I went to the academy for 4 years and then 18 and a third years before I retired. So I retired in 97, got in with the airlines in 99 and started doing that. And I was actually working at a little regional aircraft or regional company and started teaching simulators on the side. But, they didn't pay very much at regional airplanes, especially back then. Mm-hmm. And so I had gotten an opportunity to start this teaching job. So I did it on the side. And then...
So in 1997, you started flying commercial aircraft.
Yeah. Well, 99. Yeah. 99. I took about a year off between when I retired and when I got hired.
And at that point, where were you living?
Well, I retired from Grand Forks, North Dakota, and we moved to Medford, Oregon. My wife was going to have a baby and she wanted to have it. She hadn't been home since she'd graduated from high school. She went to the academy and was in the military as well. And that's where we met. So after I retired from the military, I said, well, we got to live somewhere and I didn't really want to commit to anything until I figured out what airline I was going to fly with, because I didn't, wanted not to have to commute if possible.
Got it.
And so we said, well, we'll go to Oregon because that's where her folks were and her family and all. And so it's like, she hadn't been back there in, 20 some years. So it's like, yeah, it's a good deal. So we did that. And then once I got hired on at Mesa Airlines, which was out of Phoenix. And so after the baby was born, we moved to Phoenix. And while I was still working there, I got the job at Jet Tech.
Got it. And can you explain Jet Tech? Like, how do these flight simulators work? Like, what are they for?
At the time, for example, Southwest Airlines required, before you could even get an interview with them, a 737 type rating, because that's all they flew with 737s, and they wanted people to they wanted to know that when you came, when they hired you, that you were capable of getting through the course. So they made you get the type rating before you even got it. That didn't mean that when you got there, you just started flying the airplanes. You still went through their training program, and they, taught you their way to fly the airplane, even though it was basically the same thing that you had learned at this company, because Jet Tech knew that was their primary customer. So they tailored all their instruction to their way of doing it. But it was just a way for the airline to say, okay, we know this guy's committed because he spent the money to buy this type rating and he can get through the training. So they were fairly confident that, you wanted a job there if you got it.
Got it. So a type rating was basically, you just qualified for the simulator course.
For a particular category and class of airplane or type of aircraft.
Got it. And so how long were you doing flight simulators for?
Well, like I said, I'd been an instructor in the Air Force. And so in the Air Force, I instructed both in the airplane, and we had, in the Air Force, they had, we had railroad cars. They didn't have a simulator at each base. In the old days, there were so many SAC bases and they couldn't afford a simulator for everyone. So they were actually built on a railroad car, and they would go from Air Force Base to Air Force Base for the pilots to train. By the time I was coming through, they had closed enough Air Force bases that each Air Force base had their own simulator in a railroad car sitting on a side track that, abandoned track on the base.
So by 1990, 2000, you're living in Phoenix, you have a baby, you've retired from the Air Force, and you are
started flying airlines.
Flying commercially and then teaching these simulator courses.
Teaching on the side, yeah.
And what are the typical clientele of these simulator courses?
Well, like I said, at the time, most of the people you were getting through were people that were retiring from the Air Force or getting out of the Air Force. Even if they weren't retiring, they were leaving early. And so they wanted to go fly for Southwest or whatever. So they were getting that. Or it was somebody that had been flying regional jets for a long time, had 3,000 or 4,000 hours of regional jet time, and was trying to get on at the majors. And again, getting the type rating in the 737 was one way to do it.
Got it. So these simulators were not like small aircrafts. These are guys coming in.
These are big aircraft
to fly commercial.
Yeah.
And what do these simulators look like? If I signed up for one of your courses, what would I do? What would I be in?
First off, you can't unless to take a type rating course, you have to be a minimum of a commercial pilot.
Got it.
So you start out as a private pilot. You solo, you get your private pilot's license. You get 250 hours, you can get your commercial rating, and it's a different type rating. I mean, a different check ride that you take with the FAA. And then once you have that, you can get your ATP, which is an airline transport pilot rating.
Got it. So most of the people that are signing up have like a pretty good track record of flying.
Yeah. Usually, most guys have 1,500 hours more and are trying to get hired. Now, that's not to say. We had some strange people coming through that.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I have exciting news. We have a newsletter. Yes. Hold your applause. It's okay. It's called S'more Camp. I'm telling you, I do research for this show, ton of hours a week. I love doing it. But sometimes we have facts that can't make the show. Sometimes they're too crazy for the regular episodes. So we've included them in our newsletter. A couple times a week, you're going to be getting a This Day in History fact. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It'll make you the most interesting person in the room that you walk into. You can get it from this QR code on the screen right here or the link in the description. Check it out, S'more Camp. Now let's get back to the show.
We had some strange people coming through that one class I had a couple of crop dusters out there. They had their 1,500 hours, and so they wanted to get their type rating because they wanted to try to fly Southwest. By then, they saw the writing on the wall that airline pilots were going to be coming in higher demand and stuff.
So very rarely do you have hobbyist guys coming in.
No, it's typically somebody that's looking to advance their career. And
Got it. And so are you doing classes? Is it like a group or is it kind of one-on-one?
No, well, it's usually, you always try to get a class of two just because, you need somebody in the right seat to train because it's a 2-person aircraft.
Got it.
And so you always try to put it through an even number,
And how sophisticated are these simulators?
Well, it depends. Back in the day when I did it, like I said, for example, the Air Force, the boxcar, the railroad car sim it had all the right switches and stuff. And so when you moved a switch, a light would come on. It looked like, you were sitting in an airplane, but it didn't move. So it was a static, if you will, display. Nowadays, the modern sims, they're six degrees of six-axis motion. Some of the newer ones are electric instead of hydraulics. And so you'll feel it in the seat of your pants when you pull back. The sim uses your inner ear. It tricks your inner ear basically to make you think you're accelerating or decelerating when you step on the brakes.
So it's as close to flying a 747.
You can feel it. You can get lost in it and go, "Hey, I'm really flying," because you feel the airplane moving when you're taxiing. You feel the bumps on the runway kind of stuff as you're going out, and you can when you turn the airplane around a corner, you can feel a little bit of movement and stuff. So yeah, it's as close as you can get to the real thing,
So for a couple of years, I guess, or maybe a year and some change, you're working in the simulator, training, prospective, pilots how to use these large commercial aircrafts.
Right.
So now, what is the first day that this one specific guy comes in?
So we get a guy in there one day, and I happen to be teaching the ground school, and we're at break time we go out and talk to the scheduler and hey, this guy, well, let me backtrack. On your license, I said, you have to have a commercial rating. Well, there's also a thing now, and it was even back then, it said you had to be English proficient. And because English is the international flying language and stuff. So they wanted to make sure that if somebody's coming over, especially, at least for the FAA, I mean, if you have a foreign license, they wouldn't have that. But for the FAA, it has to say English proficient.
Interesting.
And so these guys came in and they had a commercial license, or this guy came in, had a commercial license with a English proficiency. And I'm like, it says English proficient on his license. I said, this guy speaks fairly poor English. I don't know how somebody judged him to be English proficient, but it's like, said he's going to have a tough time going through training.
Sure.
And so in the course of the first couple of days, we're talking about like, yeah, I don't know if he's going to survive this. It's not. And he's like, well, yeah, it's really strange because, he wants this, but he didn't have, I think he just had the bare minimums of the 250 hours. He was trying to get it, and maybe he had the 1500, I guess, to be able to get it. But the lady goes, the scheduler goes, well, yeah, and he paid cash. And it's really strange. And it's like, he said he got it from his rich uncle or something. And it's like that. Something felt fishy to us. So we called the FAA, or, the scheduler of the company, called the FAA and said, hey, we got this guy. It just seems kind of sketchy. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about, I think we later found out that, the FBI knew that there were people that were trying to infiltrate, and get training or do terrorism in the nation. But the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand. And so, the FAA didn't apparently get the word from the FBI. I think the FBI may have reached out to some of the companies, but it wasn't getting down to the pilot levels that, hey, there's these people out here trying to learn how to fly airplanes for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, because up until that time, there had been a couple high-profile hijackings, but most of them were extortion attempts.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I think the last, it's interesting because we knew a lady that was on one of the last airplanes was hijacked in the United States, but it was in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And she hadn't flown for years and all. Well, I'd been talking to her over the years, because they went to school with our kids, and it's like, yeah, it's safe. There's no threat of hijackings and stuff anymore. And I think she had finally gotten to the point where she was ready to take a flight. And then I don't know if she did before 9/11 or not. I can't remember I'd have to ask my wife, but I know she was ready to take a flight or had just taken her first flight in 30 years or whatever, and then 9/11 happened. So
and how much did these simulators cost, or to do?
Well, like I said,
do the simulation
back then it was I recall it was $7,000 to get a 737 type rating.
So $7,000 in 99, 2000.
Nowadays I think it's probably 11 or 12,000. I don't know exactly. I don't get involved with the pay side of it. I knew that because she said he paid 7,000 cash, but yeah, I think nowadays they're $11,000, $12,000, $13,000, and more for bigger. 757 I think is 15,000, 16,000
so because
it's not cheap at all. Yeah.
Wow.
And even back then, like I said, $7,000 wasn't real cheap.
And what is the ground school? Could you just briefly explain that?
So it's 5 days of learning all the systems in the airplane.
You never touch anything. You just talk about it.
Well, no, and in most cases that's it. You're just looking at slides and nowadays computer-based training and stuff. The one nice thing that Jet Tech had at the time was we had our own level 6 flight training device, which is basically like the military's boxcar. It was a stationary device. It may have pitched up and down a little bit. It didn't do left and right, I don't think, but it was if it did, it was just basic up a little bit, down a little bit, left a little bit, right a little bit. 3 or 4 degrees, nothing. Not like the sophisticated stuff now that'll fool your inner ear. It was just enough to say, yeah, it's moving. I don't even remember if it did move. It was whatever a level 6 FTD was. And so they had it in the back room. They were in a big warehouse. And so during ground school, the nice thing is if I was having trouble with trying to get a concept across to people or just to be able to reinforce it, I could go back and flip on the sim if nobody was in it, turn on the power and go, okay, here's what happens when you turn this switch off. You see this light will come on, that light will go out, and you'll get pressure in this, gauge or whatever. And so it was a really nice training aid.
Right.
I missed that. That was great.
And so this guy that comes in, he pays in cash.
Yeah.
He doesn't speak great English.
Right.
What was the name that he went by?
It was Hani Hanjour. I will never forget that name.
And he went by.
He went by, that was his name, Hani Hanjour. That's what he signed up as.
So introduced himself as Hani.
Yeah.
And what did he look like? What was he dressed like?
Like I said, he to me, it was just a young kid from the Middle East. And in fact, like I said, we had the ground school 5 days a week. And so we'd always take a lunch break. And so we'd take them to a local restaurant, Burger King or whatever. And we had this one little Chinese restaurant we'd go to. And And so I remember the day the FAA came in, I think we had gone to the Chinese restaurant because the FAA, after we told them about it, they sent somebody in and he sat through a day or two of ground school and he talked to the guy and all, and he'd been to Saudi Arabia. So he'd talking to him, about, things about Saudi. And I had been to Saudi a few times. I'd been there 4 times, I guess, once in the mid 60s or mid 80s. And then summers of 93, 90, or 94, 95, 96, between the wars. And my dad used to fly in and out of Saudi Arabia years ago in the city that he lived in.
Mm-hmm.
I had not been there, but my dad did. And I said, I just small talk with him and, and I knew a couple, words in Arabic. And so I, could say hello and, thank you and that kind of stuff, whatever. But,
yeah. So you meet this guy.
I just kind of, it's like, he seemed like a young kid that was just getting ahead of himself.
Do you know how old he was roughly?
I don't recall, probably 23, 24, maybe. I don't remember exactly.
Got it.
I just, but he, like I said, to me, he was, I was in my 40s and he seemed like a young kid and like I said, eager to learn, but I didn't think he was ready for that level of training or anything.
Right.
And we, like I said, we said so and the FAA came and said, it's okay. Well, he didn't make it through my first week of ground school. And
what does that mean? He
means he wasn't, you take you do, before you even take the ground school, you do 8 hours of pre-study. So you come in, you're supposed to have read the information also that when I'm teaching it, it's just reinforcing your level of understanding, giving you a better level of understanding. And then we give them an exit test to say, do you know it? And you have to pass an oral exam, a couple hours of oral question and answer to see if you've retained the knowledge necessary to go on to the next level.
Mm.
And as I recall, he did not pass that first week. So he sat through a second week of ground school. And I'm trying to remember if if I had my notes, I could have checked, but I don't remember for sure. If he did make it through the second week of ground school and get into the sim for a day or two, or if it only had been when, he had just seen it during a brief period during ground school.
Mm-hmm. And so when he's coming in, is he friendly? Is he talking with
people?
Yeah,
like I said, I conversed with him and all that. Now I did have, it's after the fact. We can talk about that later, but one of the other instructors' opinion of him, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So anyway, we're just sitting there and it's like, okay. And yeah, he didn't pass. So we didn't give him a graduation. He didn't get his ATP. And we didn't think anything about it, and then I don't remember how long before 9/11 it was, but 6 months, a year. And so, like I said, when we heard about it and all, and as soon as they said terrorists, we were like, there's 19 guys from the, Middle Eastern. It's like our first thoughts went to, God, could it have been him? Could he have been one of them?
Wow.
And, and deep in the pit of our gut, we thought, that's probably what it was.
Wow.
And it did turn out to be.
And so not to jump too far ahead, but when you guys are like having dinner or having lunch, do you remember what he's talked about? If he talked much or if he just kind of like observed?
I think he just kind of answered the questions you asked or whatever. I don't think he wasn't that open, whatever, but he wasn't unfriendly. It wasn't like he was, arrogant or aggressive or confrontational or anything. He just, I think he was kind of a quiet,
Mm-hmm.
but if you'd ask him a question, he'd tell you a little bit, but it was, I don't remember, like I said, I look at people, and the world through rose colored glasses, I can make a friend of anyone and talk to somebody and converse and I make, talk to a stranger on the bus and, how you doing and this, that, and the other.
And I'm sure also you're in a position where you're an instructor. This kid comes in, he doesn't really speak English, and you're like, oh man, I feel bad for this guy.
Yeah, you're trying to converse.
He doesn't fit in with the group.
Yeah, and like I said, I was trying to ask him about his home country to make him feel like I'm interested and just to make him feel a little more at home and trying to have some shared experience. Hey, I've been to Saudi and I know a few things about it, and trying to get him to open up.
Yeah.
But he didn't really open up that much. So.
And he said he was from Saudi. He said he grew up there.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's what I said. He was from the hometown. I mean, his hometown was, like I said, the one that my dad had flown in and out of years earlier.
Wow.
And so it's like, okay, there's another common thread. I tried to, talk to him about that and all. And but he didn't open up that much about it from everything I recall.
And you looked at his flight hours up until that point.
Yeah.
And so what was he had a commercial license.
Well, yeah, he had to have a commercial to even be taking the course. And like I said, I think you also had to have the 1,500 hours to take the type rating course in anyway. So,
and do you know where he got those from?
No, I don't. That never came up in the investigation. I mean, and as far as I know, I'm sure they did it. I know there were a lot of the hijackers that had gotten some training in Florida. I think there were some that had gotten some in Phoenix too, up in Deer Valley. So, and the other question that, I don't know is, how legitimate was that time? Did he have, they used to always call it Parker time, and guys would talk about where people would put time in their logbooks that they never actually flew. So I don't know if all the time that was in his logbook was legitimate or if it was penciled in.
It is possible that some of it was fraudulent.
It could be possible that, like I said, because he just didn't have that level. It's like this guy doesn't seem like he's flown that much, and I mean that's what rang our bells, is like he just didn't seem like he was at the stage he should have been for coming in and taking a course like that.
What did he ask any questions?
Well, there were stories that guys said, "Oh, we don't care about landing. All we care about is taking off or flying, or whatever." He never asked anything like that directly that I recall. But he was just interested in trying to learn. I don't remember, like I said, even going in the sim, I don't remember if he asked questions about the transponder. We talk about the transponder, and that's one of the things that tells ATC where the airplane is and what its altitude is and all that. And so, I'm teaching it as a system, saying, here's how you turn it on and off, and there's a circuit breaker and, and all that. So he's most likely picking up on that information. And that's one of his interests, is how do I disable this? Because once they took over the airplanes, they shut that kind of information off. So the FAA couldn't couldn't find where they were.
Oh, wow. And you're saying that he did ask about that, or
I don't remember specifically. I just know that's in the course of training. That's one of the things I would have been teaching about, is how you operate the different systems, radar and the transponder and electrics and hydraulics. So,
wow. And so he goes through that first week. He doesn't pass. He goes through a second week and may or may not have.
Yeah, I don't remember that, because one of my friends, the instructors there, taught that.
Got it. And then you don't remember if he actually got into a sim while you were there. You never saw him.
I don't think so, but I don't remember. He may have gotten in, and it may have been because they wanted to try to keep him scheduled, so they may have put him in with the other student that was doing the training, at least initially, to get. Now, the other thing about that is, because here, that was a special thing about Jet Tech, is we could do, I think you were required 5 sims and then a check ride or whatever. And we could do the first 2 or 3 in that flight training device, and then you had to go to a level C or D sim, which is one that has the full motion and all that. So we could have done a couple of them there, maybe to just see, okay, let's see if he's going to be, and so he may have done a couple in ours to see, hey, is he ever, even if he passes the ground school, is he going to be able to do the training? So he may have gotten in the sim for a flight or 2. I don't know.
Interesting. And was there anything else about him in your 2 weeks that you interacted with him that was peculiar, that stood out, that you find memorable specifically?
Like I said, I didn't think that. One of the other instructors did, but it may have been, Monday morning quarterbacking too, because we never talked about it until after 9/11.
Got it. So you reached out to the FAA on day 3 or 4 of the ground course.
2 or 3 even, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Because the FAA attended one or two of the days of ground school.
And that's pretty common if you have someone that's sort of underqualified.
That's the first time I'd ever heard of it.
Oh, really?
Because every other person that had come through was, you could tell, like I said, the guys that came through as crop dusters, is like, you're going, well, if these guys only have crop dusting experience, are they going to be able to fly a big jet? But there's a lot of guys that do. Most of the guys we had, though, came through with time in little jets or little, turboprop airplanes at regional carriers or something. So they had more than just a single engine experience. Like I said, the crop dusters, I don't know if they've ever flown anything other than crop dusting airplanes, and maybe a couple of you had to have some twin engine time to get your commercial, but or to get the ATP. So I don't know. I don't remember specifically, but I mean, you're sitting there going, and they ended up graduating and they got their type ratings. So they were good enough. There were some guys that through the course of the week, you go, yeah, they may need extra instruction, say, okay, we'll put off your oral until, for 2 days, and we'll give you an extra day of specialized instruction to get them up to speed if we didn't think they were ready. Or if they failed their oral exam with the evaluator, then they'd have to get extra training. And so you go through and give them remedial training, and then they'd have to repass their oral. They'd actually have to pass an oral before they did it. So that was a designated examiner. We had some within the company. Sometimes the FAA would do them, or we could have a company nominated examiner that provided the evaluation.
Got it. And so how many other people were in the course with him? Do you remember?
I don't remember if that was a class of 2 or a class of 4. Typically, that's all we did is 2 or 4.
So it was really small.
Yeah, it's always small.
And did any of the other students say anything about him or notice anything like, "Ooh, this guy"?
Again, that was all just us after, behind the scenes, talk, like I said, on our breaks and stuff, or at lunch, we, I don't know if this guy's going to make it and that kind of stuff. And expressing our doubts too.
Yeah. And so that official notice to the FAA was the things that majorly tipped you off is like low flight hours, underqualified, and paying in cash. Paying
in cash, yeah. And like I said, that's the first time I'd ever heard of them calling the FAA and saying, "Hey, we're suspicious about this guy. Come check it out." Everything else, like I said, everybody else had been just normal. So that's what kind of stuck out, which is why after 9/11, it's like, oh God, hope not, but it turned out it was.
And then which month was this? Do you remember exactly?
No, I don't remember how soon before 9/11 it was.
This was probably 2001?
So I started teaching Sims the end of 99 or the end of 98. So all of 99, all of 2000. So it was probably 6 months or a year prior, but I don't remember exactly.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting.
Again, I don't have the date. I pull it up maybe or look it up in the 9/11 Commission and report and find out about that. But
wow. So the FAA sends an officer to kind of probe him, chat with him, looked at his documents, and they had an FAA officer on site that said, "No, this all looks fine."
Yeah. He said, "Yeah, it's okay to me. Yeah, he's a little weak or whatever, but he didn't see anything suspicious or didn't have any reason to take it any farther up his chain or take it to the FBI or anything at that point."
And did you talk with the FAA officer?
Yeah, he said in the back of the class. Like I said, he went to lunch with us that one day, so.
And you didn't tell him like, "Hey, this is," right? He didn't ask you. Like,
we talked. I mean, I told him the same things we had said. Is it seems a little strange. He doesn't, he doesn't seem to speak English as well as he should to be English proficient. To have English proficiency on his license, and he just didn't seem to have the knowledge of somebody that should be at that level in the class.
Wow. So then those 2 weeks go by, he doesn't graduate, and he kind of, he just goes away.
Yeah.
You never see him again.
We didn't see or hear anything about him since.
And then 6 months to a year go by.
Yeah.
And then September 11, 2001.
Yeah.
And do you remember where you were?
I was at home in bed. I was asleep. But I was supposed to have be landing in JFK that morning at 7:30.
Wow. And what happened? Why didn't you?
Well, we had a computer program where we could change trips or whatever. And I'd gotten my schedule, and I had picked a trip over 9/11 that I wanted to try to trade with another one. And I tried to put the trade in, and it didn't go through. And it's like, well, it should have. The computer messed up or something. So I called scheduling and said, "Hey, I should have gotten this trip trade, and I didn't get it." And they said, "Oh yeah, you're right." I said, "Well, can I have the trip?" And they said, "No, we've already given it to somebody else." But because I should have gotten the trip, they said, "You're pay protected. You should have gotten that trip. We didn't. So just stay home." They paid protected me, and somebody else then got called for the other trip. So I don't remember if it was the original trip or the one I was trying to trade into, but one of them would have had me landing at JFK at 7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
So by the time we got to the hotel, it would have been, I'd have probably been in the shower about the time it happened.
Wow.
Because we used to stay on those long layovers. We stayed in downtown Manhattan.
And just to be clear, the flight that you were supposed to be on was not one of the ones that was hijacked.
No. There were no America West airplanes.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you wake up in Phoenix.
Yeah. Well, and the kind of funny, ironic story about that is I may not even known about it for a number of hours later, but at night, the night before I'd been watching TV, and I was supposed to turn the TV to the cartoon channel. So my youngest son, when he got up, he knew how to turn the TV on, but he didn't know how to change the channels. So I was supposed to put it on the cartoon channel, PBS or whatever. And so he could, if he woke up before mom and dad were ready, he could sit and watch cartoons. So he turned on the TV, and I'd gotten in late for some reason the night before or whatever. I don't remember what I was doing, but my wife just said, let him sleep in. So she'd gotten up to take care of the kids, and she goes downstairs, and my son's in the living room, but he's not watching TV because it's news is on, and he's just playing with his toys or whatever. And she sees that they're talking about the Twin Towers, but she didn't really know what that was. Didn't register to her. But then, I think she even heard him say that the planes or a plane had crashed into. I don't think she heard that both planes had crashed into it. About that time, I think, is when they came on with breaking news. They were showing the towers, but they came on with breaking news that a plane had just hit the Pentagon. And because I was in the military and she'd been to the Pentagon and all, she knew what that meant, the seriousness of that. And she comes running upstairs, Rod, plane just hit the Pentagon. And I'm thinking, what, a Cessna crashed into the Pentagon, lost its engine or whatever and couldn't steer away from it or something. I didn't know, just because I'm waking up from dead sleep. And so I go downstairs, and then of course I'm pinned to the TV all day. And as they're talking about terrorists and all, we're getting this deep pit in my stomach. And, a few hours later, I think when I probably waited until they announced that they were, Middle Eastern hijackers or whatever, I think is when we started, the instructors started calling each other a couple hours later. It's like, hey, you don't think it was Hani, do you? And it's like, yeah, I think it was, and so
wow.
That's, yeah.
Hey guys, I know this episode might be a little bit heavy, so we're going to take just a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because it's 2024 and it's time to talk about something important. When you are seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. Yes, that's right. The world is a crazy place, and one person's negligence can result in another's settlement. And that's why I got to talk to you about Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They have over 100 offices nationwide and over 1,000 lawyers. Yes, these are the big boys. You know them, you see their billboards all over the world. If you ever drove down I-90 from Florida to New York, I'm telling you, you've seen the billboards, all right? Have you ever watched a UFC fight? You've seen them right on the banner. I'm telling you, these are the biggest guys in the game, all right? With over $20 billion recovered for over 500,000 clients, Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting to get you full and fair compensation. The annoying thing with most attorneys is that in order to submit a claim, you got to call them up, you got to talk to their people, you got to go back and forth on emails, you got to hope that they see it. They might charge you just to even look at their claim. Here's the cool thing with Morgan & Morgan. With 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim and one of their licensed attorneys will take a look at it and get back to you. It's that easy. It's like ordering something off Amazon. It's just a couple clicks. You can submit your claim very easily and cheap. Yeah, how about $0? That's how much it costs to submit a claim with Morgan & Morgan. Extremely easy, no fee required. So if you are ever injured, you can go check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. That's right, unless they win for you, unless they fight and get you compensation. You're not paying a single dollar. That's a pretty good deal. So for more information, go to forthepeople.com/Gagnon. That's correct. forthepeople.com/Gagnon, or dial pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. That's for the people, forthepeople.com/Gagnon, or dial pound law, pound 529 from your cell phone. This is a paid advertisement. Now let's get back to the show after this short disclaimer. And so when was it released, the names of the hijackers?
That I don't remember if it is. I think it took them a few days to come up with the names. I don't remember exactly, but we were suspicious of it because we had been suspicious before. And so we like I said, we had that feeling that, it was probably him.
Wow.
And that's what I was talking about. So one of the other instructor that I was, one of the guys I think that had done some of the other ground school, when I said, yeah, I thought, he was a good kid. He just didn't belong there. He didn't, couldn't speak English well enough or didn't have the level of knowledge to be taking a course like that. And whether it was colored by his judgment of what had just happened or whatever, but he was like, nah, he said, I never liked the guy. I could see him, coming by my house and slitting my family's throat. And it's like, I'm going, I think that was like Monday morning quarterback and going that, because the kid I don't think he put off that vibe at all. Like I said, I do look at the world and look for the best in people. But I thought that was a little over the top for him to make a statement like that. But in essence, that's what his opinion was after the fact.
Wow. So for those days before they released the names, you're just sitting at home thinking, holy shit.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Was this the guy that I met that came through the simulator course?
That I trained. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I think they had started talking about these guys had gotten flight training in Florida or whatever. I mean, by that time, I think they were starting to piece together. They'd gotten training in Florida and I don't know if they said Phoenix right away. Because I think, as I recall, Florida was the first place they started talking about it.
Yeah, I think Sarasota.
Yeah, Sarasota. Yeah. And I think there was some training in Denver too. And then Phoenix, like I said. And I found out after the fact too, that there had been some of the light, the commercial training had been at Deer Valley up in Phoenix. They had a small aircraft, thing up there. So guys were getting the commercial training, the private and commercial stuff up in Deer Valley, I think.
So then
I don't know if it was our guy or not too.
So then when you see the names get released, what was your initial feeling?
Oh, I said, it dug that pit in the deep, the deep pit in your stomach. It just kind of reinforced it and reamed it out a little bigger.
Wow. So, yeah. And did you tell your wife,
my wife obviously knew. I mean, we had talked about that, from the get go that, I said, I think it's the guy I trained and, but we kept it to ourselves. What I found out last night, I was talking to my son, a couple of his friends, and he reminded me, and I had forgotten it, and my wife didn't remember it either. But I guess because Phoenix is 3 hours behind New York, like I said, she had gotten up to get the kids ready for school and for carpool and stuff, and he said, "Yeah, I remember you guys called me into the bedroom and showed me the TV and said, these planes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and they think it's terrorists or whatever." He was in the 4th grade, and so we're letting him know just because it was going to come up at school and kind of give him a little forewarning of it and stuff. And he knew Dad taught in the sim. I'd taken him to the sim and I'd let him try to land the airplane and stuff a couple of times. So that was a nice benefit of having it in the building there too. But
wow,
so. And we didn't tell the 2nd grader. And then, like I said, the youngest was, if he was in anything, it was just, pre-K or whatever, kindergarten. So yeah, but because he was in the 4th grade, we told Sam.
Wow.
And then it was just kind of for the next couple of weeks, it was just as they're releasing information, we're talking about it amongst ourselves, but that's it, just within the family and the couple instructors and people in the sim training area. It was years before I told anybody outside of that group of people.
Wow. And do you have any idea why they chose your sim course or why they chose Phoenix or why they chose any of the places they chose?
I don't know. I don't know at all.
So Hani's day that day, where did he take off from? Do you know?
I'm trying to remember the details. They all took off from either New York or Boston, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
No, or maybe they took. I remember Boston being as part of it because they had some of the photos were of them going through security at Boston.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if a couple of the planes took off out of Boston and a couple of them took out of JFK, or if they went through Boston to get to JFK and that they had all started out of JFK. But then a couple of them turned around and went back, and then the one went to toward the Pentagon, and then the other one went to got taken down in Shanksville.
Wow. And so a couple days go by, the names are released, and you go, "Oh wow, that's Hani."
It was for her.
You're talking with your family, you're talking with the immediate instructors that know.
Yeah.
But then, obviously, I'm assuming, you probably feel a mixture of different emotions. So I get the feeling of like, okay, let's just kind of lay low, and I'm not going to come out and say anything.
Yeah.
Did the government reach out to you? Did the FBI reach out to you?
Yeah, and in fact, that's where. That's when Sam found out what was going on because he was at home.
And Sam, again, is your son.
My oldest boy. I just found this out last night, too. He said, the guy called and he said, "Yeah, is your dad home?" He said, "No." And he said, "Well, can you tell him this is so-and-so from the FBI?" And I guess he thought he was somebody playing a prank on me where he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm in the FBI, too," or something. And, made a joke about it. And the guy, "Well, just make sure your dad gets the message." And then when I got home and he told, he told me, "Yeah, Dad, some guy said from the FBI called today. He's going to call you back or whatever," or gave me a number. And so, he said, when I called him and now he hears me talking to him, he's like, oh, this was real, not just a joke.
Wow.
He had thought it was a joke at first.
So what was that call with the FBI like?
Well, they wanted to interview us. They took some initial questions on the phone, to find out what we knew and tell them what we'd already basically told, the FAA at the beginning and all, that we didn't think the guy had belonged there. And we told them that we'd told the FAA and that the FAA had come out and said, no worries. So, we did everything right as a company and as a group.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think they called us in and actually sat down and interviewed us and asked some more, detailed questions or whatever. But,
wow.
So yeah, so we told them everything we could. And, of course it's, after the fact, closing the barn door after the horses get out is a little too late to do anything about that knowledge. But what I learned, like I said, later on is that there were pieces of information out there and suspicions that, had they been making the correct, or left hand been talking to the right hand and disseminating the information properly. But that's one of the things I learned, or that I didn't like about the airlines in specific, in particular is, in the military, if there was an aircraft accident, especially in your fleet, you would get the 72-hour preliminary report. You'd get a 30-day report. You get a 60 or 90-day report. You get, 100, I think they did 30, 60, 90, 120, and then final, maybe an annual and then a final report. And so we'd get them, and I don't even think they were redacted in any way, maybe the crew names were left out, but I think they were even fully, available. And so we could sit around, and of course we were, at the time I was in SAC alert. So you're spending a third of your life, sitting in the alert facility waiting for the big one. And, so we'd sit around and we'd kind of, discuss it. Hey, what do you think happened here? Why would they have done this or what, and try to learn from it. I mean, it was the Air Force did it as a learning experience. We want you to know what happened and see what led up to the accident, the chain of events and all, to try to learn from it and not have it happen to you, type of thing. Whereas in the airlines, there were accidents that you might hear about a year or two later in ground school when it finally got out. You'd know what happened basically, but you didn't get any details from it as to what had caused it. So one of the things I think when you first approached me about it, I had also remembered you talked about the hijackings and stuff. And I didn't find this out until after the fact. Of course, after the hijackings, they said, hey, they came up with the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program, the FFDO, to arm pilots in the cockpits. What I found out at some point, either then or shortly thereafter, is that only a few months before 9/11, pilots, they had just changed the law that pilots could not carry weapons. I don't think pilots had carried at all but in the 70s, they had passed it saying pilots could carry weapons because of the hijackings. Well, that law was still on the books and only got pulled shortly before 9/11, just because I guess somebody's like, oh, why do we need that there? So pure coincidence. And like I said, I don't know if there was anybody that even carried in the 80s or 90s, because by then the hijackings were so far behind us. But it just seemed kind of ironic to me that now they had to go out and pass this new law saying pilots could be armed when they had just killed the law a few months earlier.
Bizarre.
Yeah, just kind of a strange coincidence.
Now, do you know if any of the other instructors or any of the other simulator companies had filed similar sort of reports to the FAA as you had?
I don't know specifically. I don't know of any other type rating schools that were involved. I never heard any names of other companies. When they talk about it, they always talk about flight training in Deer Valley and stuff like that. And for some reason, I don't even think that the name of our company necessarily had gotten out. That it happened there. They said in Phoenix and all, but I don't even know if the name Jet Tech had gotten out at that time, which is, it got bought out by, and I don't even know if it was Jet Tech at the time. We had gotten bought out by Pan Am International Flight Academy. So it may have been lumped under that, but that was associated with Florida. We were like a satellite base in Phoenix, because they bought out the Jet Tech. And so I don't even know if Phoenix was mentioned as a type rating type school that had gotten it. So I'm thinking that maybe either Pan Am down in Florida or there. I think, like I said, I think I heard Denver, and that might have been through one of the type rating schools up there, but I don't remember details about that.
Interesting, but there was nothing else that you knew about on the record where it was like some
where
other
somebody
instructor
else had complained or whatever. Again, like I said, I'd have to go back and look at the 9/11 report and see if there were details to that level of anybody else complaining about it or whatever.
And you're named in the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah, like I said, well, yeah. In fact, my oldest daughter, that's married to my son-in-law in San Diego, a couple years after 9/11, for whatever reason, she was Googling stuff and called me up and said, "Dad, how come when I Google your name, the first thing that comes up is the 9/11 Commission?" Because at that point, I hadn't told her yet. She wasn't, like I said, the other kids, I don't even know if I had told them, because they were, like I said, Sam was in 4th grade. So what's that, 10 years old, 11?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't even think I had told the younger kids at that point yet. And pretty much just kept it to myself. I think a few years later, there was one or two of the captains I was flying with that, for whatever reason, we had some discussions, and it was they had some involvement in something else, because I found out. Well, in fact, I just found out at a retiree meeting with some of our pilots the other day, and found out that one of the guys said that his wife, or I was talking to his wife, I guess, and she said that he had said, "Oh yeah, I had one of those guys on my jump seat just a couple of months earlier." So they had been testing the system out, and so if they weren't airline pilots at that point, so they were using, or maybe I don't think any of them even worked at a regional air companies or whatever. They were somehow using forged documents, which allowed them to get onto the jump seat, which is why now we have a whole detailed program and computerized system to verify that you are who you say you are to get onto the jump seat of an aircraft. Because that's one of the benefits of being a pilot, is if you're having to commute to work and there's no seats in the back of the airplane, there's still one or two up front that you can commute to work on if you're a qualified pilot.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so they had been apparently forging the documentation, and yeah, he had one of the hijackers on his airplane prior to 9/11, a few weeks prior to 9/11.
Wow.
We had after the fact, we heard cases of people that were finding box cutters in the back of our seats. There's a little pull down panel that we have our life vests in, because you have to have a life vest for each of the occupants and whatever. And that's one of the things we would inspect in the morning, is that the life vest was there and that it was adequately dated or whatever. But after 9/11, when we heard about the box cutters and all, we'd start actually taking them out, and guys were finding box cutters in airplanes, though they had been pre-hidden in some of these airplanes, So I don't know exactly if that meant that they, were just trying to see how long it would, could go on before somebody found it, or if they were putting them there and then the next guy would find, they'd get the tail number and the next guy would take it out of there. Because once they got it there, it's behind security. Now they can move it a little more freely. I don't know, but yeah, there were stories that we had, guys finding box cutters in the airplane.
Wow.
Now, it also could have been some idiot that was just trying to, be stupid.
And had it and then ditched it.
Yeah. Or just after the fact, some guy thought it'd be funny to put it in there or something. I don't know. I can't imagine that. But
was it on aircrafts you were flying, or just people you knew that were flying?
Well, we just heard about it kind of through the grapevine. And again, a lot of that information doesn't get disseminated. Airlines, they're a private company. The Air Force can tell you everything, and nobody's going to sue the Air Force. You're worried about, the airlines are worried about somebody suing them. So they don't want any of that data to come out and, oh, well, yeah, this accident happened because this guy did this or this guy did that.
Wow.
Ultimately, it does come out, but they tried to be tight-lipped about it. If it wasn't going to come out through the news, then they didn't want anybody to find out about it. So, so some of that stuff was, you were hearing about word of mouth from somebody that said, hey, yeah, we found a box cutter on our airplane.
Wow. Yeah. Truly bizarre.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious. I mean, this is obviously a very heavy, moment in American history, and you sort of saw it and lived through it in a way that's very different than many other people. I'm curious, do you feel, or did you feel, any guilt about your involvement in 9/11?
No, like I said, initially it was it seemed like there was a stigma to it, which is why, like I said, I just didn't want to talk to people about it. And, it was a long time before I decided I was ready to go to the 9/11 memorial, just because, there was, just a different feeling. I won't say it was a stigma or anything necessarily, but I mean, it wasn't, like disgusted or sad or I mean, if anything, I was pissed off about it that, could we have done more to stop it? Could we have done something that would have, you know, it's like, had he chosen one of my flights to jump seat on, I'm going, wait a minute, how the hell is he a commercial pilot already? I mean, or how's he got a job already when he didn't even pass the type rating course or something? So, a coincidence like that could have possibly nipped it in the bud, but it didn't. But I still, I mean, it was just a weird feeling. I know that's the best way to describe it. Just,
Yeah.
But, maybe a little embarrassed, a little ashamed, but just didn't feel the need to talk about it to too many people. I didn't want it getting out,
Was there any part of you like going to sleep, like, I should have done more. I could have done this.
Like I said, I think we did everything we could as a company, as individuals. It's like, we brought it to someone else's attention who should have had more horsepower to do something about it. What are we going to do? Just say, no, you can't do it here. We don't want you to, as a student. It's like, we asked the question, we didn't, should this guy be a student? It just doesn't seem right. And if the FAA says, yeah, it's okay, then it's like, well, we'll take his money, but it just seemed like he was wasting his own money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we probably tried to tell him that too. It's like, we're not sure you're going to make it through this course or whatever. And cause that's the hard call you had to make, even with additional training. You got to tell a guy, hey, you're not ready for your oral or your check ride. That means more expense for them because they got to rent the sim for another day or two of, training. And that's just more money, than they've already paid.
Yeah. Do you think the FAA could have done more?
Well, like I said, in retrospect and hearing that, I think it was the left hand didn't talk to the right hand. The FAA, I don't know if because supposedly the FBI knew that there was a potential for it. So the FAA didn't talk to the right people in the FBI to get to the right, that's what I say. It's the cross communication didn't happen to the right people at the right levels, So they could have elevated it more and say this, I mean, I think we let them know that it just, something didn't seem right, but the guy we talked to, maybe he's the one that fell down and said, everything's okay. And he didn't bother to raise it to his superiors. Maybe had he done that, maybe then that would have gotten to the right people. Who knows? It was just a breakdown in communication. It's big bureaucracies and, like I said.
Did you ever see that FAA agent again that came in, or did you ever speak with him again after the fact?
I don't believe he was around for a few more years, but I don't think I ever had any direct contact with him, no.
Wow. Yeah, it's just such a fascinating time in U.S. history, and it's so morbid, and your experience with it is so close. I'm curious, did you continue teaching simulation and courses after the fact?
I continued to do it for a number of years until after we bought U.S. Airways, they said we couldn't do outside training anymore, so we had to stop for a few years, and then they came back and said, oh, yeah, we were wrong, you could, and so... By that time, I was a captain, and so I didn't do it again until I retired. Just because I was as a first officer, I was living in Phoenix, and that was my base. Once I upgraded to captain, my base was Los Angeles, so I continued to commute. So with the commuting, I didn't have time to, and I was making enough money. I didn't need the part-time job.
Mm-hmm.
Once I retired, I just wanted to keep my hand in aviation, and I enjoyed doing it. I've loved teaching and all that. So after I started back up again.
After September 11th, did they put any checks into place so that this type of thing couldn't happen again?
Oh yeah, that's what I said. First off,
what were the checks?
They had the system where everybody had to be certified and approved to get onto a jump seat. They strengthened that policy to the point where it was a computerized system. And in fact, I just heard the other day, a guy said he couldn't get on an airplane because somebody's CAS system was down, the access system to allow him to get onto the jump seat. So
wow.
he their computer system was down, so they couldn't verify that he was who he said he was. And if you can't verify it on the computer, it's like you can't go on our jump seat. So.
That's probably smart. I mean, that seems crazy that like a regular kind of pilot could get access to a jump seat.
Yeah.
And when you say jump seat, just so everyone knows, that's the small seat behind the two pilots.
The two pilots, yeah. It's designed for the FAA or a company to go on and evaluate your proficiency. They would do it periodically. You'd get a line check once a year or something, and then the FAA could come out and do the same thing. And so it was for official uses, but when it was unoccupied for those reasons, then they said, well, we might as well let pilots get to work on it.
And so this guy that your friend had said, oh yeah, he was in the jump seat behind us, one of those eventual hijackers.
Yeah.
How was he able to get access to the jump seat?
That's what I said. It had to have been fraudulent. They had to have but that's back before we had the CAS system. So, then it was just, you showed, you used to be able to just walk up and say, here's my pilot credentials. And, for another airline, and they say, and it said pilot. And so they had just figured out a way to copy those. And,
they look at it, they say, hey, we have an open jump seat and you're obviously a pilot with this
another
line.
Carrier. And And so, that's apparently how they were able to sneak on.
And then what about like paying in cash or any of those other things that
were? Well, the paying in cash, for simulators now. Yeah. It used to be, I could take my kids to the sim and say, hey, let's get them a play in there, in the sim a little while or whatever. Because it was, in that case, it was company owned, but even at the airlines, guys would say, hey, I want to take my family in and let them see what it is I do. And that was an easy way to do it. Now it's like for the students we have now that come through for training, the headquarters, the head of the company, the schedulers and all that, they have to provide paperwork to the FAA. The FAA has to approve that paperwork, and also there's a very stringent. So I can't. I got friends that say, hey, I want to get a ride in the sim. It's like, well, I can't get you in the sim because the FAA controls who goes in and out that sim building now, basically.
Oh wow.
Yeah, if you're not approved, the company does it, but if you're from a foreign country or something, sometimes they used to. I think they still do require a headshot. They want to make sure that the person on their records is the same as the person you're letting into the building. So you can't give them somebody's credentials and then somebody else walk in and try to do it. So it's very, very strict now.
Wow.
So again, it's like I said, in a related story, my son-in-law, when I talked to him and he found out, he told me about when he was in high school, he was working for his dad's company, and he used to stop and, or actually he was out of high school, but anyway, he had a house up in La Mesa, and down at the bottom of the hill he lived on, he used to stop and fill up the company trucks with gas every night when he got home, before he got home, and he'd buy soda or something. And he talked to a kid in the store there that was there most of the nights, studying, who was a San Diego State University student, I think, taking some classes or whatever. And so he's always in there studying and stuff, and he'd shoot the breeze with him a little bit too, same thing. And it turns out that kid that he talked to was in the back of the airplane of the kid I had trained.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was one of the muscle in the back of the airplane. And the other thing that was kind of ironic is, with the tie back to my Air Force days, is Hani was on the airplane that hit the Pentagon.
Wow.
So that was the airplane I actually heard about first, is the Pentagon, and that turned out it was him.
Wow. Now, when you say the muscle in the back of the plane, what?
If you recall, there were 19 hijackers. One of them had either backed out or couldn't get, make it, got, waylaid somewhere along the way. But they had one or two pilots up front, but then they had, because there were 4 airplanes, they had 3 guys in the back, like for crowd control, the muscle to keep anybody from, to quiet the passengers down in the back.
These are the guys with like box cutters that were kind of like holding people hostage.
Yeah. Well, or just, keeping people from trying to keep the what happened on Flight 193, keeping people from rushing the cockpit.
And one of those guys,
my son-in-law had talked to this kid like I said, it was like a 7-Eleven AM PM store, gas station that he stopped in every night after work. The kid was in there. He was, taking classes and stuff. And so my son-in-law just had talked to him for a number of times beforehand. Same thing. Didn't know who he was until the names came out. And he goes, shit, that's the kid that was in the thing. And he happened to be on the same airplane as the kid I trained.
And was this in Phoenix?
No, he was in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
He was in San Diego, La Mesa.
So this guy, another hijacker.
Yeah, was living in San Diego and going to school, but he may have been getting training. Well, he wasn't. Well, if he was the muscle, so I don't think he was doing any flight training. But and they talk about the the Middle Eastern culture and all that. There were stories that these guys had been going to strip clubs and all that. So they were not living up to the
Muslim law.
They
were not living a halal life.
They were not. Yeah, they were not living a pure life or anything.
Wow.
At least as the stories go. So But
did your son-in-law describe his interaction with the other guy?
Just the same thing. It was just he thought it was just some kid, student studying, and he shot the breeze with him, and had small talk with him. Nothing.
What a bizarre coincidence.
Yeah, that's why I say it was just a very, very strange coincidence.
Wow.
And then I just found out two things. One, my wife said that one of the kids on his baseball team had a parent who was a flight attendant, and they had gotten out of their trip. They had traded it to someone else.
Just by happenstance.
By happenstance. Same as I did. They tried to trade it, and in their case, the trade went through, so they were either at home or on a different trip, and whoever they traded the trip with was, in 9/11 for the
wow. On the flight.
And I think I'd have to ask her specifically if she was talking about if maybe it was somebody on American, maybe it was an American or a United pilot or flight attendant that was actually one of the airplanes that crashed.
Wow.
And Sam said he'd met a girl whose father was in the World Trade Centers when it happened, but he got out. He was on like the 11th floor or something, and he got out when he was there when the plane hit.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I want to tell you about a really fun little game you can play in your app and another way that you can make some cash. I'm talking about Prizepicks. Yes, that Prizepicks. It is super fun to play. It's super easy. All you got to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. That's it. They're going to score this many points in the game, more or less. Steph Curry is going to make this many points, more or less. It's that simple. I've won dozens of dollars. I'm up like $25. I'm not good at this game. I'm bad at picking, who's good at sports. That's why I focus my attention on the sports that really matter. And that's Joey Chestnut versus Kobayashi, the greatest hot dog glizzy sucking contest of all time. Right now we got Joey Chestnut more or less on 64 hot dogs eaten. I'm going to go more. Kobayashi, more or less on 51 hot dogs. I'm going to say more also, but I still think Joey Chestnut gets it. In 2023, he sucked down 63 hot dogs in 10 minutes. I'm pretty sure in 2021, he took down 76. I mean, who's putting up numbers like that? Sure, Kobayashi's the old OG, the legend that we all know and love, but Chestnut is here to stay, all right? So I'm taking more on Chestnut, more on Kobayashi, but just remember, you heard it here. And you know what's going to make watching this so much more fun is knowing that I'm going to be making some cash. Or maybe losing it. I don't know. So go to prizepicks.com/camp and use the promo code CAMP and get $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. You don't even need to win. Good news for me. You don't even need to win. Just by playing a $5 lineup, you're going to be getting 50 buckaroonies right into your account so you can keep on playing. Let's get back to the show. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because if you're anything like me, you like a little caffeine kick. You like to maybe grab a coffee, maybe 1 or 2 during the day, but you can't always access it. Maybe you're going on a hike. Maybe you're at the airport 4 a.m. They don't have any coffee around, but you still need your caffeine. That's why you got to check out Bashmouth. Bashmouth is a completely healthy, natural, clean energy gum. That's right, you heard me. Within each little piece of gum that comes in this little discreet package, you get 130 milligrams of natural caffeine. That's like a little boost. That's like a little coffee and a half for you. And if you need it, like me, sometimes I'm going to the gym and I don't want to drink a pre-workout that's going to have all sorts of other chemicals in it. I pop a Bashmouth. I mean, this is like if Gushers and Bubblicious had a baby without any of the bad stuff. There's no dyes, no sugar, no gluten, none of that nonsense. It stays soft and flavorful for hours. It's not going to make your jaw hurt after a couple minutes. And the delivery system is instant because you're chewing it. It uses green coffee bean extract, and so you get the nootropic effects from chewing. No jitters, no crashing. You feel great. And not only is this for athletes that are going to the gym, maybe you're a traveler, maybe you're a hiker, like I said, maybe you're like me, stuck at the airport and you just want a little bit of coffee. You got to check out Bashmouth Caffeinated Gum. Yes, Bashmouth is the greatest caffeinated gum on the market. And they got 2 great flavors. They got spearmint, or they got this one right here, Poppy's Sour Apple. And if you're interested, if you're a listener of this show, I got great news. If you use the promo code GAGNON20, that's right, GAGNON, GAGNON 20, when you check out, you're going to get 20% off your total order site-wide. That's correct. I recommend you go check them out at bashmouth.com. That's BASH, mouth, MOUTH.com. And you can get yours today. Use the promo code GAGNON20 and you will get 20% off your entire order. Caffeinated gum. Stay alert. Stay locked in the natural way. Let's get back to the show.
Now, you were a commercial airline pilot throughout that whole period.
Yeah.
Did the hijackings and the events on 9/11, did they scare you? Did they concern you? Were you afraid of a copycat attack?
No, like I said, the procedures they put in place, it seemed like, and there was the awareness of it now. I mean, they had written about, I think Clancy wrote in one of his old books about the potential for using an airliner as a weapon, and in a terrorist attack or something. And so the idea had been out there for a number of years. And so that's why it was like, but it wasn't, I hadn't read that book at the time, and other people had, I guess, but it just didn't seem maybe realistic at the time or whatever. And again, because we weren't getting the information that the FAA had or that the FBI had, that there's this potential of people, coming out to, or coming up with ways for a terrorist attack. Didn't think about it. I mean, when I was in Saudi, there were terrorist attacks. There was a little bombing in downtown Riyadh, and so I was aware of it in the military, and I knew overseas, but you just didn't think about it in the U.S. It never really crossed my mind.
Now, I understand back in the day, like cockpit doors might be unlocked or open for the whole flight.
Yeah, I don't know that they were closed. I don't know that. And there was, I think back in the day, there was a key, one of which I found out, I was at a small commuter airline before this too. And one of the instructors came out and, they issued his keys to the airplane. He said, "Here, watch this." He had an old 57 Chevy key and it worked in the door. So it was just a generic lock. It wasn't back then, but that was, like I said, that was, pre 9/11. It was such a different, everybody, in history, my parents had pre Pearl Harbor and post Pearl Harbor. I was a kid, and I think you said you were too, that it was pre Kennedy assassination, after Kennedy assassination. And so everybody has that. And I've got one of Sam's friends I met last night was born after 9/11, that's like, and so there are kids that don't even know it didn't even happen in their lifetime. For my kids, it's pre 9/11, post 9/11. And life changed dramatically. It was a seismic event in world history, in the course of man. And it was that singular event that then changed everything. Every time you go to the airport now, you think of 9/11 because we're having to stand in longer lines and more security and this, that, and the other. So all of that changed. Sam reminded me of a time that, back in the day when I was as an airline pilot, you couldn't take your family into the cockpit, but I remember he reminded me that he had gotten close one time, and I guess it was, I told him to, or I don't know if I told him or whatever, or he just happened to be there, but he had come up and I came out of the maybe they called me out of the cockpit and said, "Hey, your son's here." So I opened the door and he was able to at least look in and see the stars, out in front of us and all that, and see the view. He didn't walk into the cockpit, but he was able to, back then you could have the door open. Now it's like, you can't have passengers in front of the first class bulkhead when you're opening and closing that door. There's all sorts of procedures for that to make sure that if there's any threat outside the cockpit at all and that door is open, you slam that door shut. Now we have ways to lock the door to prevent it from opening. If they try to force the flight attendants to open it with the entry pad at the back of the airplane,
right?
Then we can lock them out. So there has to be coordination.
Oh wow! So there's a ton of new safety measures.
There's a ton of new procedures to prevent it from ever happening again.
Wow!
At least in the way it happened. Now, like I said, that's the thing is there are other ways that could, that they're dreaming up out there now. They had to have been planning this for a long time. They had these guys in training for a year or two trying to get this whole thing set up and organized and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, that's the scary part, is that with all these people coming in, that who knows what evil plans they have in their minds now too.
Do you feel like this was additionally sort of like hurtful or traumatic to you because you had military experience? You love America. You've worked for the U.S. government.
Yeah,
and
like I said, it did. I mean, especially because he hit the Pentagon, and that was just like I said, it just kind of it tied my military and my airline experience together in that and the training all into one thing. It's like yeah, it was, but yeah, it's definitely. I mean, of course, I love this country, and I hated to see all that happen, and I don't like the what's come of it. I understand it. It doesn't mean I enjoy it or appreciate it, but I mean I appreciate that they're making an effort to prevent something like that from happening again. But all that means is they're going to find another way to do something.
Yeah, unfortunately. Now there's all these wild conspiracy theories that obviously surround 9/11.
Yeah.
People look at, the footage from the Pentagon airplane, and some people say, oh, it was a missile, it was a drone. I mean, in your experience as an airline pilot, how confident are you that was an aircraft?
Oh, it was an aircraft. Yeah. And I had a friend of mine that, was trying to say, 9/11 was a setup and all that. And it's like, oh yeah, see, there's the explosions here and all. It's like, no, if you really study it and look at it, well, how did the building collapse like that? Well, because, they've got people in there that show that the heat of the jet fuel was enough to melt the girders. And once it melted the girders in one floor and it pancakes, then it starts a chain reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the bridge that got hit.
Yeah, Baltimore.
You hit one pier, and that's the hinge pin, and that whole bridge just collapses, in a matter of seconds. Well, that's the same thing happening. One floor collapses on top of the other one. That weight is enough then to collapse the one below it, and then it just pancakes all the way down. So yeah, I mean, it was. I had a buddy that did the aftermath. He was a firefighter in San Diego, and got called out to 9/11 to do the 9/11 rescue and recovery. And he's paying for it now with some health issues. But so yeah, it was what it was. I mean, there were people that think the Kennedy assassination was a conspiracy or whatever. And I have researched that enough to know, and I've seen some good things that show how, the misinterpretation of some of that data was just like, yeah, you're not reading it correctly.
Right. Yeah. And I guess, people that say, oh, it wasn't an aircraft that hit the Pentagon, it was a missile or something.
Where'd the missile come from?
Yeah. And then on top of that, there was a guy that you trained that was suspicious, that you never saw again, that was linked to the event.
Right.
And I guess they would have had to have planted that person also.
Exactly. Yeah. I have no doubt that it was not any sort of conspiracy or anything, except on their part. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it was a conspiracy to attack America.
Conspiracy to attack America. They laid out a plan and unfortunately executed it well enough to succeed.
Wow. Have you ever heard of anything happening afterwards? Any of the people in the flight community that you know of where, there was an attempt to try to hijack another plane, or other terrorists trying to do a copycat attack that then were reported, that then were reprimanded?
No, I've not heard of anything else. Like I said, the training issue was cut off with all the requirements now for validating who is going through training and that kind of stuff. The security of the flight deck has pretty much made bulletproof. So there's not really, I don't see any way that something anywhere similar to that could happen now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's going to have to be a totally different, idea of some sort.
Sure. And then after your interview and interaction with the FBI agent that reached out to you and your inclusion into the 9/11 Commission, was there any other follow-up or any other, experience that you had with this specific event? Since that date, I imagine was probably like 2002.
No. nothing I've heard from since.
And then how many years went by? I know you told your kids maybe after like 10 years, but how long until you were comfortable kind of telling people?
Like I said, there were probably 2 or 3 pilots or close friends that I had told at some point up until about 2017. And then we had a big family reunion in 2017. And that's when I told my extended family, my brothers and my sisters and cousins and that kind of stuff, relatives.
Wow.
Before that, like I said, I hadn't bothered to, it was just too close. And like I said, that was, by that time I'd been to the 9/11 memorial and, kind of, made my peace about it and stuff. They had, I told you they had the Federal Flight Deck Officer program that they initiated after 9/11. And I wanted to do that. And yet by the same token, I delayed doing it just because of like I said, the way I felt at the time. And, I waited a couple of years and said, well, I'll give it a couple of years before I'm ready to do that. Unfortunately, by the time I was ready to do it, they had stopped the program. I applied once, when they said they were getting ready to restart it, and they ended up they had enough volunteers or whatever that I didn't get called. And so I never had the opportunity to get into it again and do it. But yeah, it was just, like I said, I didn't just, it was just that weird feeling that I was like, I don't know if I was ready to do that or not. It just, I wanted to, and my military background said, yeah, I should do it. But by the same token, I just didn't, I didn't know if I was ready to jump that thing yet. I didn't know if I was right,
Yeah, I mean, it's such a visceral moment in U.S. history.
Yeah.
Do you ever get mixed reactions when you tell people like, yeah, I trained one of the hijackers?
Just kind of the surprise, like, no, not really. And it's like, yeah, I did. They just kind of, at first they think you're just joking. And it's like, no, I did. And that's,
But no one's ever gotten angry or try to confront you about it?
No.
It's such an unfortunate event that you just happened to be the person running the simulator at the time, running the ground school at the time.
It was just, I happened to have those days off. And so I said, hey, I'll teach. And they, it was just a coincidence.
Do you think you have any residual, trauma from that experience today?
No, I've, like I said, I've made my peace with it now and understand that, it is what it is. It happened. I was part of it, but it was not, again, we didn't do anything wrong. We did everything we could to elevate it to the proper authorities. It didn't happen, but we were such a small part of it that, even if they had said, hey, this guy's out to do something nefarious, they take him off the street and arrest him or whatever. There's still 18 other guys out there that could have done it and pulled it off. There may have been 3 airplanes instead of 4 or something.
Yeah.
Or they would have gotten another pilot to do that airplane. And
yeah, there's no shortage of terrorists in the world, unfortunately. Yeah. And so I'm sure if, that person or 10 of those people got clipped, could they have replaced them within, 2 years and delayed?
Yeah. It would have just been delayed. Yeah. I mean, it was, they had it in their mind they were going to do that, and they had the patience enough to do it. So again, there are things going on now that they're planning, I'm sure. And as people have said, they only have to be right once. We have to be right 100% of the time to prevent it. Mm-hmm. So that's the unfortunate reality.
Wow. And how many years in total have you been a commercial pilot?
I started in 99. So, and then, well, like I said, they fired me because I hit age 65 in 21. So, I guess I did it for 23 years.
Wow.
I've been able to, since I'm 65, I can't fly passengers commercially, but I can still fly empty airplanes. So I've ferried some airplanes around the world and stuff, do that, which is fun, be able to still get to fly.
Interesting. While I have you, I'd love to ask you a couple commercial airline questions.
Sure.
So 23 years of commercial flight experience.
Yeah. What's
the scariest thing that ever happened to you while you were flying an aircraft?
Nothing is really scary because you train for it. If I lost an engine, I would do it just like I do in training. That's why you train for.
You've lost an engine before?
No, I haven't. I'm saying, but in the simulator we do. And so I'm saying, so for me to lose an engine, it would be a non-event, it's like I guess the worst thing I ever had was we lost a couple of our IRs, which is the inertial reference systems. You have 3 on the airplane, and we lost 2 of them. And so it took away some of our screens. And so it was my takeoff. So we're taking off out of Newark. And when I rotated, you're looking outside as you're going down the runway. And as soon as you rotate, you look inside to kind of make sure you're going to the right pitch attitude. And I look inside and my screens are dead because we'd lost these 2 IRs. So I had to look over and fly cross cockpit, which you're trained to do. I was trained to do that in the military. The first thing you do, if you recognize your instruments are bad, you've got another set of instruments just right over there. So you're looking at the other instruments. If both of them fail, you got a standby instrument. So there are things like I said, you just know what to do and do them. So anyway, and of course, shortly after we lift off, as soon as you get the gear up, all of a sudden these bells and whistles start going off to tell you that, hey, you've lost these systems. Well, I knew it because I was looking at it, but I'm flying the airplane. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And so the captain's over there going, and we have a computerized thing that it's called the ECAM, the engine condition and monitoring system. And it says, hey, this failed, whatever. And it runs you through some steps to try to recover it and turn off computers and turn them back on, trying to get it. So he's over there, with his hands full, going through the checklist and trying to figure out what's wrong and all that. And I'm flying the airplane, and we're talking about it when, I'm talking to ATC or he's talking to ATC and trying to do everything. And we get up to 10,000 feet, and he's finally at a point where he's kind of gone through all these checklists and all. And he looks over at me and he sees me looking across cockpit at his flight instrument. He says, "Why are you looking over here?" And I said, "Because I got nothing in front of me." And that's the first time he realized that I've lost my screens.
Oh, wow.
So I'm doing this all across cockpit, and he's, and so we talked about what are we going to do? And we determined that the weather was good enough to go all the way across country, because it was like severe clear over the entire, we took off out of New Jersey, and in the airlines, if you have a problem, there's a couple decisions you have to make. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Well, we had just taken off max weight basically out of Newark. So to go back there, we're either going to have to orbit for a long time and burn down fuel to get below our max landing weight, unless it was a fire or something. If it was a fire, we'd land overweight and
that's interesting.
Yeah,
so you have to be below a certain weight to land.
Yeah.
So you have to burn enough fuel.
Yeah, there's a max landing weight. Now, if you land above that, you have an overweight landing checklist that you would run. Again, everything's done with checklists.
Sure.
So you'd run through this checklist.
That's an emergency situation.
Yeah, it's an emergency situation. And you use your emergency authority to say, it's safer for me to land this airplane overweight than it is to orbit. If the airplane's on fire, you want to get on the ground as soon as possible. So, but in our case, we're looking at it going, the airplane's perfectly flyable. We've lost some computers. We've lost some navigation, capability. But at that point, we're basically a big Cessna 172. We could fly from VOR to VOR across country if we had to, as long as it's severe clear. Now, if there were thunderstorms and all that, we might have made a different decision and all that. But it's severe clear going across the country. So we proceeded. We said, well, and at the time, Columbus was one of our mini hubs. It wasn't a full hub, but it was a mini hub. And so we said, well, we might as well keep going there. So we're talking to maintenance, control, and dispatch and everything, and saying, hey, here's what we got. We couldn't do anything to fix it in the air. It was an unrecoverable thing, but we said, we're okay to keep going. So we went home and landed. And then there were some questions after we landed that, the captain told me later. He said, well, you flew that airplane across, all the way across the country. You shouldn't have, and you should have landed. And it's like, no. So to make a long story short, they called up Airbus, the powers that be at our airline, and said, hey, well, these guys, how can they do that? And Airbus goes, why? And there's nothing wrong with it. The airplane was fine, Wow. So they validated our decision that we were okay to come across the country. And
so landing without screens was fine?
Well, yeah, the captain still had his. So he did the landing, but landings are visual anyway. I mean, again, it's a Cessna 172. There are airplanes out there that you can fly with basic instruments only. You don't even need anything but an ADI and stuff. Well, like I said, had push come to shove, I could land it across cockpit too, because you're using that to get down. But once you get close to the ground, you took out land visually. You know?
Interesting.
If you fly an ILS approach, you got to, the minimums for an ILS approach is 200-foot ceiling. So at 200 feet, you should be able to see the runway. At that point, it's a visual maneuver. You don't even have to look inside.
Anyway.
Yeah, you're looking outside and doing everything. So now the airplane can also land with zero visibility, or basically zero. I've had 2 auto lands in my career.
And what happens there?
The airplane lands itself. You program the computers. You have to have certain parameters met, and all the equipment has to be operating, correctly. And you have all sorts of situations where if anything fails, you get an auto land light that flashes red that says, "Hey, you can't land." But otherwise, you set it up. You can program everything in, and the only thing you do is at 50 feet. That's your last chance to say everything's operating perfectly, and the airplane will do it itself. Or if you get the auto land light or anything, you'd go around. But at 50 feet, it's just the alert that says, "Hey, the airplane's getting ready to do its thing." And at 40 feet, it starts raising the nose a little bit. And at 30 feet, the power comes back, and it tells you to pull the thrust levers back. Even if you don't pull them back, the power comes back. But then you pull it back so that that it stays there. And then it lands, and it stays on center line. You can have the auto brakes on; it would auto brake itself.
And how are the landings?
They're firm, but acceptable.
And why don't y'all just always auto land?
Because you need to know how to do it if the system doesn't work.
Yeah, sure, you know how to do it. But if I'm you, I'm just be like, yo, let this thing auto land the whole time.
I look at it and go, I'd rather do the landing myself. I know the airplane can do it. I like to do it myself because I'd like to make it a nice smooth landing and just it's a big video game. I get my quarter's worth. I put it in. I want to hand fly the airplane when I can because I know the airplane can do it. And they.
Wow. You ever had an unruly passenger and had to turn around?
Not turn around or anything, but I've had to. And that's the thing too. Back in the day, you'd go back and you'd discuss it with somebody or something necessarily, and the captain would go out of the cockpit. Now it's like, no, we don't leave the cockpit because it could be a ruse to get you out of the cockpit.
But has that happened back in the day? You went back there and you were like, hey.
Yeah, just, hey, and most of the time it was pre-flight or whatever, that settle the situation.
You had to go talk to someone?
Yeah.
And what happened?
You straighten it out and just kind of console them and
was it like a drunk guy?
Reason them. Yeah. Well, and I did have one flight from JFK to Vegas where we had some unruly passengers that were creating, and I think on that flight we may have made the threat that, folks, if we can't get people to quiet down, we're going to have to divert to somewhere and land.
Do you know why they were unruly?
They were going out for bachelor parties and stuff, and they were drinking. They were imbibing in alcohol that they had brought on board because we don't sell fifths of wild turkey on the airplane. Yeah. And afterwards, we're cleaning up the cabin and the flight attendants, and we were back there helping them. And they found a couple of fifths of wild turkey empty. They found cans of beer that we didn't sell on the airplane and stuff. So,
wow.
And that was the one. Reggie Jackson was on that flight.
Reggie Jackson?
He was sitting up in first class, and that's the same flight. And because some of these people, I'm sure a lot of them had been drinking before they even got on the airplane. And he didn't do what a typical, most celebrities or whatever, when they get on the airplane, they'll either board late or they'll get on the airplane and, put their hat down or put that newspaper up so they couldn't be seen or whatever. Well, he's just sitting there playing his day, and everybody's coming, "Oh, Reggie," and he's getting tired of it. He got mouthy, and he was not a great passenger. He got pissed off, and he's like, "Oh, this is the worst flight I've ever been on," when he got off the airplane. And it's like, well, it's your own damn fault, But because people were coming up, trying to get autographs from him and all that. It's like, well, if you don't want the autographs, then hide yourself.
Yeah, put your hood up.
Yeah, put your hood up, put your newspaper up, and stuff. So wow. He didn't help himself, and like I said, and then he got pissed at us. Well, because they're back there drinking and carrying on and carousing and stuff, and he made his presence known. So that just made, threw fire on or gas on the flames.
What's up, people? We're going to take a break really quick because I got to tell you about an amazing sponsor. This sponsor needs no introduction. You've seen the ads. You've heard us talk about it a million times. And I bet there's a big part of you, pun intended, that wants to try it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Bluechew. That's right. This is not your grandpa's blue pill. This is the one, the OG chewable tablet for better lovemaking. That's right. Bluechew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients you'd find in like Viagra, Cialis, all this stuff, but but at a fraction of the cost in a chewable form. That's right. This process is super simple. You go online, put in your information, and Bluechew.com will consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you will receive your prescription in just a few days. Easy, sent straight to your door. The best part, it's all done online. No doctor's office, no awkward combos, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. This is Bluechew.com. They always say first impressions are important, but what about lasting impressions? You know what I'm talking about. You go out, you meet someone, and you tell them, hey, I'm going to take a Blue Chew tablet, and I'm going to rock your world. Blue Chew wants the entire country rock hard. They told me that's the mission. They're not going to stop until every man is bricked up, like a brick house. You know what I'm talking about? Till every tent is pitched, till every rod is raised in this great, beautiful land known as USA. Discover your options at Bluechew.com. And actually, if you're listening to this, I have a special deal for you. For all the listeners of this program, you can try Blue Chew for free. That's right. If you use our promo code GAGNON, that's GAGNON, which is a funny promo code for a product called Blue Chew. Use the promo code GAGNON at checkout. Just pay $5 in shipping. That's like a cup of coffee. It's nothing. That's Bluechew.com with the promo code GAGNON, GAGNON, and receive your first month for free. That's right. Visit Bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And thank you so much to Blue Chew for sponsoring this amazing broadcast. Let's get back to the show.
Who's the most high-profile person you ever flown?
I don't know. I've met Sugar Ray Leonard, met John Cleese, Axl Rose.
Did you ever get an autograph? Did you want to go back as the captain?
You're not supposed to go get autographs or whatever.
But you were probably excited as the captain. You were like, "Hey, nice to meet you."
Yeah, it's nice. I went back one time.
Jeffrey Epstein.
In Vegas. Perennial name in Vegas.
A magician? Who is he?
No, an actor, an old actor.
He's got a place in Vegas.
Maybe I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, he had just gotten a new. This was back when they had like the new video players or whatever, and I saw it, and I happened to have the. His was I had the jukebox version of it. He had the video version of it, so I was back there talking to him and all that. And the other guy I met was the guy that played Hercules.
I know who you're talking about.
Anyway, he was up in first class. And I saw his kids and whatever, and I was back there just chatting with him a little bit, and went back. Like I said, we helped the flight attendants clean up and stuff, and I found his kid's little car and all. And it was the last flight of our day. I was ready to go home. It was landing fees. Kevin Sorbo. Yeah, and so I took the chance. I grabbed the car, and instead of going straight to my car, I ran downstairs to baggage claim, and I saw them there. They were collecting their bag, and I said, "Hey, your son left this, whatever." So
oh, that's cool.
He appreciated that. But
you ever have a medical emergency? Someone died?
Oh yeah, I've had a number of medical emergencies, and it's typically they don't do it anymore. Now you do everything. They have a way for the medical people to answer the phone or talk to the ground, what we call MedLink. They don't let them in the cockpit anymore. In the old days. And even after 9/11 for a while, they were doing it, I think. But now they don't do it anymore. The nurse or whatever, if you had a nurse on board or a doctor on board, you'd have them come into the cockpit and they could relay the information to, now they do it via form and they fill it out in the back, they slide it under the door, and we relay it back and forth. But,
and what happened? Do you remember any of the specific instances?
No, like I said, some of them are just somebody having shallow breathing or whatever, and so they're it's like, is it a heart attack or not? And so they have a contract with MedLink that those people make the decision. They have doctors on the ground that you provide them all this information, and they make the decision: should you divert or not? Should you, or can you continue? And a lot of times it was just. Turns out, it was the person hadn't eaten a meal or whatever, and they'd consumed too much alcohol, or they'd missed some of their medication.
Too many weed gummies.
Yeah, or they'd missed a medication or something, and so we're having a reaction. But no, I've never had anything. Well, I did have one where after we landed, everybody's off the airplane. There's a guy still sitting in a seat, and the flight attendants are trying to wake him up. Couldn't get him to wake up, and he was severely drunk and passed out, or I don't know if he was high on something other than just alcohol or whatever, but he was out of it, and ended up basically, I think, having to get somebody to come, shake him enough to wake him up and carry him off the airplane.
Oh, you ever heard of someone dying on a plane?
Well, technically nobody ever dies on the airplane because there's nobody on board to pronounce them dead.
Oh, wow.
So I have heard some cases where, somebody died and they basically just ignore them. And then after everybody gets off, then they call, the medical authorities to come remove them from the airplane.
I mean, that's what I would do. If I'm sitting there and someone dies next to me, I'm like, hey, I'm making this flight. All right, we're getting to where we're going. All right, I'm not saying a word.
Yeah.
Are you crazy?
But I mean, it's one of those that there's nothing you can do for them. If they're already dead, there's nothing you can do for them,
I would maybe trade seats with them. I mean, if they have a window seat.
If they have the window seat, yeah. Well, I don't want to move their body, so.
But you don't get to keep the window seat if you're dead. You know what I mean? You don't even get to enjoy it, right? Yeah. I would immediately switch.
Yeah.
Let me get the view.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think. There have been a couple cases where we've had somebody, had to go off the airplane. So in those situations, you'd tell everybody to remain seated, and let the medical personnel come on first, and they'd come on with an oxygen bottle or something, and they'd get them off the airplane.
Wow.
So yeah, different.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sometimes if we're running late on a flight, okay, and like we're late to take off, the captain will come on and be like, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking off 30 minutes late, but we're going to make up that time in the air."
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Well, the winds are better than projected. There's a few shortcuts you can take. Sometimes you can get direct. That usually won't save that much time. But a lot of it is just the way the airlines schedule things. Is like a 5-hour flight is 5 hours in the air. I take it back. The airline will say, it's 6 hours from Phoenix to New York, but 30 minutes of that is sitting on the ground from pushback, because they start the clock at pushback to get out to the runway, because you get out there and you're number 20 in line. And so you got time on the ground. Well, if you're 30 minutes late, they have this bank of airplanes that go out at the same time. If you're 30 minutes late, you go out and there's nobody there. You're number one in line. So you only take 5 to 7 minutes to taxi. So you've already saved, 20, 25 minutes there. And same thing on the other end. If you're getting there, if you have some good winds, or you can speed up a little bit, you can add an extra, instead of flying at 0.777 or 7.8, you can fly at like 0.8 or 8.1 Mach, which it may save you 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how long the flight is. And so there's a few things you can do, but it's basically that. I mean, there are times when we would land 30 minutes early and then have to wait for a gate and still block in late. So the airlines have those schedules padded enough that you're going to make up the time on the front end and the back end. They have a 20-minute taxi on the inbound leg, and you go, usually it only takes 5 or 10. So.
I just want to tell the pilot, like, hey, let's just make up the time every time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's just
yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
All right, which airport sucks the most?
Depends on what you're talking about. I think Phoenix is a lousy one for traffic getting to and from the airport. The roads laid out there are just abysmal. They're an afterthought.
Fair. What about flying into?
But flying into, Boston's kind of a strange one, because they have, it's a triangular pattern of runways, 3. And so if they're using 2 sets of runways, you're crossing, have crossing traffic. And so it's just more of a challenge for ATC to get airplanes in, and you've got a little more risk of, if somebody's taking off on that runway, it intersects with your runway. And so there's just more, variables and hot spots, if you will, we call them.
Do you get to pick your co-pilot?
No.
So what if you get paired up with someone that sucks?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do with that. Number one, you can ask to be removed from the trip or whatever. And it depends on the airline and what rules they have. In some cases, you just, I've heard a captain saying, okay, you're off the trip. The guy does something, and the captain says, okay, you're done. I'll call scheduling, get a replacement for you when we get to, to the next.
What if they're
location.
just annoying? They just keep talking about their wife nonstop. It's like, we get it, dude.
You just, I mean, if you're the captain, you have a little more authority to say, okay, I don't want to hear any more of that,
Oh, really? Have you shut someone down one time?
No, I'm like I said, I'm a very personable. Like I can get along with anybody for 4 days. There was one guy we had that nobody really liked to fly with him. He was always gruff and snarly and stuff and all that, but he just had kind of a dark sense of humor or whatever, a little bit. And I got along with him fine. I didn't let him push my buttons, And I actually got to go, he called me up the night before. I'd flown with him once or twice before, and he calls me up one night and says, "Hey, I just got called by the chief pilot. We're going to be doing we were going to be in in New York for a long layover." Said, and it was the day we were getting. Can't remember if it was we were doing the closing bell on Wall Street. The CEO was or whatever for something. I can't remember what specifically it was now because we did the CEO's done it a couple of times and for different reasons. But it was one of the mergers or something, I think, when we bought US Airways. And he called me up and said, "Hey, I was going to get out of this trip. I was going to call in sick for it, but they said we're supposed to do this stock exchange thing. They wanted the crew up there standing with the CEO and the VP and all that, and he said, but then I was talking to my neighbor, and he's a stockbroker, and he said, "Oh, that's a really big deal to get it, do the closing bell thing and also." And so, like I said, I had a good time with him the whole time, and I just never let him push me around. But other guys, just and like I said, I think he had a hard attitude. But I can get along with just about anybody.
You ever said something on the intercom that you shouldn't have said? Or have you heard someone say something? You're like, "Hey, man, you're on a hot mic right now. You shouldn't have said that."
No, there are a few cases you hear where somebody the buttons, if you push them the wrong way, there are people that on the ATC frequency have said, "Ladies and gentlemen, on your left is the the Statue of Liberty or whatever," because they're pushing the wrong button. But no, I don't think I've ever said anything I regretted or whatever. Like I said, I didn't talk a lot. I mean, there's some of these guys, hell, the other day coming out here, we had a guy that talked for, it seemed like 10 minutes. He's yakking on and on and on.
Some of these guys are yappers,
and people, yeah. And I got to the point where I think most people don't pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most people fly enough. It's like, just leave me alone.
Yeah.
I told them the basics, we're planning on an on-time arrival or whatever. And I don't get, and even the weather, it's like nowadays people know how to check the weather on their phone. You don't need to give them, all the detailed, well, it's going to be raining in JFK when we get there. Well, they know that, and, because they planned ahead and they looked at the weather on Google. So, yeah. So
now I know you're a good man.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of these pilots are out here, they're philanderers. Tell me, are a lot of these pilots cheating? Be honest.
Oh, there are a fair amount. I don't know if it's a lot. I mean, I had a buddy that used to tell me about something. He flew to Africa a lot. They do some of the countries in Africa and stuff, and they'd be over there for like 36, 48-hour layovers for the long trips because it was such a long flight, and you had to get your body acclimated and then be ready to come back and all. So they'd have really long layovers, and he would tell me stories about how they'd get there and they'd designate one of the rooms as the party room that everybody go to. And,
oh, really?
And then, and then somebody else, a couple of people would double up so that room could be used as a party room. And so, and yeah, meet
a flight attendant.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, he was dating a flight attendant, although he was married.
Mm-hmm.
And,
no way.
Yeah. And he had the audacity his wife apparently planned a 60th, I think it was 50th or 60th, I can't remember which, birthday party for him. And his flight attendant girlfriend showed up. Now, not as his girlfriend. As a
coworker.
But just as a coworker.
Oh, this guy's a dog.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
This guy's a dog.
But she was in the kitchen helping or whatever. And apparently she made enough remarks about having done this or having been there or whatever that the wife put two and two together.
She caught him?
And yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you get, dude. What an idiot.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, I grew up with some of the movies. You've probably seen them too. Where the pilot has a family on the East Coast and a family on the West Coast. I'm going, how the hell is that possible? Well, when I became the airline pilot, I was like, well, yeah, I can kind of see it happening. I mean, I can't imagine having to juggle that and do it.
Deal with it.
Yeah, I can't imagine something like that. But
yeah. Yikes! I mean, have you ever met a pilot that like drank before a flight?
Well, we had a famous couple of pilots that did that back. In fact, I was up at my brother's cabin one time. We had a little family reunion, and I come downstairs and it's like, I see a couple of your pilots got busted for drinking. The ones down in Florida,
Oh, really?
Remember that?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, what's up, guys? Sorry to interrupt this amazing program, but I need a little bit of help. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably see our subscriber number right down here. And if you're able to, it would mean the world if you could subscribe. That is the best way to support this show, because when you subscribe, I'm able to show it to potential guests or to different brands and stuff like that. And it really, really helps grow the show, get us cooler guests, have cooler conversations, and it helps everything so much. So if you don't mind, thank you so much. Let's get back to it.
Back in like 04 or something, I think. And it was a thing that they got hammered hard because they said they were, they called it DUI, and the pilots tried to argue that, well, they weren't actually driving because the tug was pushing them back, and they got stopped before they started taxiing.
Oh, that's hilarious. So that guy was driving.
Yeah, that guy was driving. Yeah, we were just in the passenger seat. But
we were just hammered on the plane.
Yeah,
we didn't know what was going on.
But yeah, there are cases of guys that push it too far. I never pushed it that hard at all. I had to have, the minimum was 12 hours drinking prior. And if I didn't have 18 hours, I wasn't going to have a drink. And
wow.
And then it just won or whatever. But
now I'm one of these guys, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
There's some people, when they see a female pilot, a woman pilot, they'll be like, oh man, I feel less safe. I'm one of these people, I feel more safe.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think if a woman became a pilot, she had to go through so much shit. She has to deal with all these scumbag guys. She's probably the best pilot on the whole fleet.
Well, I wouldn't say the best, but I mean, but they're very good pilots. I mean, I've flown with a lot of female pilots and female first officers. Captains and first officers or whatever. And there were none. There weren't anybody. There was nobody that I thought that was unsafe or anything like that. There were, like I said, there were some people that was like, yeah, if I don't have to fly another trip with this guy, it's okay, and you could avoid it, and depending on what system your airline has, you can, you can just try to avoid that person on your trip. You could put on there, we had what's called a no-fly list. So you could say, I don't want to fly with Captain XYZ.
Oh, and they would honor it.
And they would honor it to a degree. And I can't remember, like I said, it's too long ago. If the captain said he didn't want to fly with a first officer, then the first officer would keep the trip, and then they would assign the captain a different trip. But if a first officer said he didn't want to fly with a captain, then they just wouldn't pair him with him. I think they ran the captains first and then the first officers or whatever. So if the captain said it, well, they already ran his schedule. So if the first officer had a no fly, they just wouldn't fly him with him. But if it was the captain had I don't remember. I'm talking to myself in a circle, but they had ways to deal with it.
They had a hierarchy.
Hierarchy of who got priority and all that. So.
Wow. You ever heard of this guy, the Sky King? This became a meme a few years ago. There was this guy up in like Washington, I think, that he didn't hijack the plane, or I guess he kind of did. I think he was working as like a grounds person.
Was that the ground guy that took the airplane out in Portland or Seattle?
Yeah, and he crashed into an island.
Yeah.
You heard about this?
Oh, yeah.
This is a crazy story.
Yeah.
This guy basically tugged it out himself, jumped in it while it was rolling, somehow figured out how to flick everything on.
Well, ground personnel, if he's a mechanic, they know how to do engine runs. They're trained to do engine runs. And taking off an airplane's not hard. It's the landing that's the hard part.
Yeah, and he didn't do that part that well.
No, he didn't do that.
But apparently he did some crazy maneuvers.
Oh yeah.
Did you hear his comms? Like, have you heard the clips?
I think I've heard parts of it. Yeah.
Where he's like, just going through a lot right now. Yeah. Just wanted to take this thing out for a spin.
Yeah.
He apparently did like a loop-de-loop.
Oh yeah.
In
a barrel roll, I think.
But in a giant aircraft.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like, I think like the air traffic guys were like, we've never seen. Yeah. We didn't know this airplane could do that.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of interesting side stories I can tell you on that. Number one, the Boeing 707, when it was first developed, the airplane it was developed on was called the Dash 80. That was Boeing's test model. And they were trying to sell it to the Air Force. And the test pilot on the proving run, the day that the Air Force was out there to observe it, came out in the Dash 1, in the Dash 80, and did a barrel roll over Puget Sound.
Wow.
They have a picture. I think there's a video of it too, but there's a famous picture of it upside down. That's what convinced the Air Force to buy the airplane. They said, if it'll do that, we'll take it.
And that's a big aircraft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the little fact that people don't know is that Dash 80 birthed the 707 and the military version, which was the Boeing 717. Everybody says they've got a 2-engine airplane they now call the 717. It's really just a McDonnell Douglas airplane. It's a twin engine that they said when they merged with McDonnell Douglas, they said, well, we'll call that the 717. It's not the 717. The KC-135 aircraft airplane is the true Boeing model 717.
Wow.
Yeah. If you don't believe me, when you climb up the ladder into the airplane, it says Boeing model 717 right on the airplane. There's a riveted plate there. It shows it.
You heard about this Boeing whistleblower that killed himself?
Well, yeah, I don't know what to think about that. It seems very suspicious for sure, but I don't know enough of the story to know. It seems, from what I heard, he said, yeah, I'm not going to kill myself. And then he does the day before the last day of testimony. Something sounds weird, fishy with it, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't have enough knowledge or experience about it.
I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to kill myself.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree with Boeing.
Yeah.
I think Boeing's doing nothing wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever they say.
I don't know if they're not doing
them.
anything wrong. I think they've got some management problems and some like I said, the people building the airplanes and the people working on the airplanes should be doing the same thing pilots are. There's checklists for doing everything. There's tech orders that say, here's how you do this procedure. And if you don't follow it, you're supposed to follow it to the letter and you get it signed off. You sign it off and then your supervisor comes and checks, double checks and signs it off. You're supposed to be doing things by the book, so if you're cutting corners, and there's stories that maybe they're doing that. I don't know, how do you miss putting bolts into an airplane door that should have them in there? So somebody somewhere screwed up. And that's just like, doctors have now gotten to the point where they've adopted some of the pilot, checklists or whatever to make sure they don't screw up in operations and stuff. Back in the day, they'd leave, lap pads and equipment inside people. And it's like, oh shit. Oh, we have to cut him open again and get this out. We forgot,
Yeah.
but so they've got procedures in place. Now, again, it's all in doing things by the book and trying to get it right. But I was going to bring up, if there's an interesting story have you ever read about the disgruntled FedEx pilot? Oh, this is back in the 70s. And he had gotten fired from FedEx, but he somehow had managed to hang on to his ID or whatever. And so he hatched this plan he got a jump seat ride and was going to crash the airplane into the FedEx building.
This is a cargo plane.
A cargo plane, yeah. And it's a fascinating story. There's a Reader's Digest version of it. I cannot remember the name of it or whatever, but they don't know how the captain or I can't remember if it was the captain or first officer. One of them got their head bashed in pretty severely and both of them did really, because whichever one of them landed the airplane, they couldn't even figure out how he had enough strength in his arm to land the airplane. He mangled him that bad. He had like a hammer or a pipe wrench or something that he was beating the crap out of these people with.
And they subdued him somehow?
And ended up one of them ended up getting out of the seat and subduing him. And then the other guy, like I said, ended up landing it with, and it's a crazy story. You have to read it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, shout out to FedEx, dude. Always getting your package on time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So,
I mean, that is just wild.
But yeah, that when you talk about hijackings, that was an internal, and that's one of those too. Well, and I don't know if you've ever heard the story. There was over in Europe, there was a German first officer in, I don't know if it was Lufthansa or some other carrier. I don't remember which carrier it was, but he, the captain excused himself to go to the LAV, and he flew the airplane into the ground.
What?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You didn't hear about that one?
How?
That was 8 or 10 years ago. What do you mean how? He pushed the nose forward and
that was it.
Committed suicide with 150 people behind him or whatever.
Oh, it was a suicide.
They think it was a suicide thing. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. There's some, and so now, again, procedures in place. When we go to use the LAV, one of the flight attendants comes into the cockpit but yeah, the captain's banging on the door trying to get back in, and the guy's talking nonsense again. I think nonsense on the radio and stuff. And Yeah,
tragic.
Yeah, that's why I say most of the mishaps nowadays are pilot error, not or the mechanical
actors.
error. Yeah, bad actors. Mechanical error, is with the exception of the things like Boeing or whatever, where it's they screw something up. But the mechanical errors are way down from what World War I, World War II.
Yeah,
More than half of your losses. Aircrew losses were training accidents.
wow.
Yeah, I mean they were killing people left and right, in training because they just didn't have the technology back then. They they didn't have sims and stuff to put people in through. So your first flights are in your airplane and yeah,
Bad
you
things
screw it
happen.
up. Yeah, you screw it up and bad
What
things
about this?
happen.
The Malaysian Airlines flight. Do you know anything about that?
I looked at it quite a bit or whatever. I have no idea what happened. I mean, it's a mystery to me too. I mean. I heard everything from they were looking in, when it went down, they were even looking in the wrong place. And so, I mean, there's some weird stuff going on. There was a famous thing with that with an A-10 pilot years ago too. Guy took off in an A-10 and they lost radar contact with him and he was down in the weeds or whatever. And he finally popped up a couple places and he ended up hitting the side of a mountain somewhere in Colorado. And again, they think it was suicide, but it
Weird.
Yeah.
You never seen anything weird up there? You never seen like a military aircraft and you're like, hey, what is that? Or ever
No, not really.
something flying real fast by you?
No.
A little UFO situation?
No UFOs type situations. No.
Damn.
No.
And last question.
Can't go down that rabbit hole.
Is the Earth flat?
Is there what?
Is the Earth flat?
No, it's not flat.
All right. Well, I guess we settled that one.
Good.
Mac, thank you so much for
Oh,
coming
you
on,
bet.
brother. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for
Appreciate it,
sharing
Mark.
your story. This was fascinating, brother.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much. Let's talk soon.
Okay.